part one of the Roman trials. You may remember in Wayne's lesson last week, he covered the Jewish trials of Jesus. There were how many stages? Do you remember that? Three? Three stages. And of course, Peter's denial of Jesus occurred then. Now we're going to move into the Roman portion of the trial. Um, Question: why did the Jews have to take Jesus before the Roman government? That's exactly right. They wanted Jesus to be put to death, and therefore they did not have that authority. The Sanhedrin wanted Jesus dead, so now they had to convince the Roman governor to have him killed. The Roman trials, like the Jewish trials, had three stages. In the lesson today, and we'll finish up on Wednesday, we're going to talk about the first two stages. Any questions so far on the review, comments? Wonderful. Let's turn, and if you got Roper's book, one of the things I like about it is all the scriptures right here in the front, and it's easy to follow along. But I'd like to take the time to read there's different scriptures for today's lesson because each one is unique in itself. And so I'm going to ask volunteers. Dan, would you read, please, Matthew 27, 11 through 14? John, would you read Mark 15, 2 through 5? And I'll call you guys on what to forget. Jack, would you read Luke 23, 2 through 7? James, would you? John is quite lengthy, so I'm going to divide it in two. Would you read John 18, 28 through 32, and I'll pick it up on 33. Anybody need to repeat it? Okay, it's Mark 15, 2 through 5. Oh, 478. Luke 23, 2 through 7. Dan, you're good to go? James, good to go? Okay, we're going to start off with Matthew 27, 11 through 14. Go ahead. Okay, thank you. John, Mark 2 through 5. Okay, thank you. Jack, 23 in Luke 2 through 7. Thank you. James? Thank you. And then the last part of it says, therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? Pilate answered, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Therefore, Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him. Okay, I know that was kind of a lengthy reading on all those verses, but there's some similarities between all four, obviously, and there's some differences in that Luke talks about sending Jesus to Herod, where the other three Gospels don't. And, of course, John's Gospel is quite lengthy in his report. Now, it says in the beginning of Luke 23 that Jack read, the Sanhedrin representatives, or in this case, that the whole multitude of them, delivered Jesus before Pilate. Now, Pontius Pilate was the current Roman governor over Judea and Samaria. If you have your Roper's book, turn over, and this was interesting reading to me, page 651, and it had a Pontius Pilate and the death of Jesus in part of the appendix. Now, I'd just like to read it to you. Have you heard of Gratus? Is the name Marcellus familiar to you? You may say, I have no idea who these two were. What about Pilate? Surely you have heard of him. This is interesting because Gratus was the Roman governor of Judea before Pilate, while Marcellus was the governor after Pilate. And both were better governors than Pilate. Question is asked, why do we remember Pilate? Because Jesus stood before him one day. He goes on to say that most of what we know about Pilate comes from the gospel accounts and the record of his governorship by the Jewish historian Josephus. However, there are also other scriptures, historical and archaeological references to him. The study draws from these sources plus others that mentioned the death. It's interesting that Pilate was not considered a very good governor. He was kind of a wheeler and a dealer, so to speak. He didn't want to rock the boat, wanted to keep things, going. Now, as governor, what would have been his primary duties? Keep the peace at all costs, really, because if there had been an uprising and trouble, he'd be gone. He'd be gone. What was his second job? Is keeping the peace, and what else? Collect the taxes, right? Collect the taxes. But he also had the distasteful responsibility of approving and carrying out of the execution of anyone sentenced to death by the people's own government. In this case the Sanhedrin. It's interesting to note that in John's account, it contains only a brief account of Jesus being taken before the high priest Annas, and lacks any information on his appearance before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. However, John's record of Jesus before Pilate is more lengthy, as you can see by the reading, and detailed than those of the other synoptic gospels combined. Okay, John gives a much deeper account. Pilate's headquarters was called the Praetorium. And that's a Greek word taken from Latin, meaning official residence of the Roman governor in a given locale. What's interesting, so if the governor is traveling and he goes someplace, they will set up his office or praetorium at some locale. Now, I don't know if anybody had the chance to look at this in the appendix or on the online, but this is a map that was given. It's in our book on page 664 on Roper's book, but it shows the city of Jerusalem with the suggested path of Jesus' final hours. Now, different biblical scholars argue back and forth where this praetorium was set up. Most believe that the fortress of Antonia is where Pilate had his praetorium. It was Pilate's where he held court there. Others think he maybe took up residence in Herod Antipas's father's palace, Herod's palace on the west side, but we don't know for sure, and it doesn't really add to or take away from the story. It's just that we don't know for sure where it was. The other thing to note is that the praetorium was Gentile territory. So what does that mean? Therefore, the Jewish hierarchy did not what? They did not enter into the praetorium because they would not want to be defiled, right? So they might eat of the Passover. It's ironic when you think about it that these hypocritical leaders did not hesitate to condemn an innocent man to death, but would not risk ceremonial uncleanness. What does that say to you about them? So, what Pilate did was he went out to the Jews and he asked them what? Do you remember? He said, "What accusations do you have against this man?" And do you remember what they said? Look at verse 30 in John the 18th. He said to them, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." Now, that's kind of a flippant response in my estimation. Hey, we wouldn't be here if he hadn't done something wrong. Very judgmental. Very vague, also. Very vague. Jewish leaders first tried to get Pilate to sentence to death Jesus merely because they asked him to. We want you to put this guy to death. In our laws, we can't do it. We want you to do it. Now, keep in mind, it was, as we said before, in Pilate's best interest to cooperate with the Jews. But when you think about it, that was asking a lot. That was asking too much, in fact. Pilate's response was, "You take him. Judge him according to your law." Now, here's where the plan quickly unfolds, and we see the true desire behind what they were doing. They told Pilate, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." Okay? They did not have that authority. The Jews had been allowed certain concessions by the Roman government, but the Roman government retained for itself the right of life and death. This also fulfilled what Jesus had said concerning how he would die. And that was important to fulfill prophecy there. You may remember that the mode of execution favored by the Jews was what? The Jews. Stoning. Yeah, remember in Acts 7:58, the stoning of Stephen. Okay? But the Romans obviously preferred crucifixion. Very, very bad way to die. Any thoughts or comments up to this point? Okay. In Luke 23:2, it says they, meaning the Jews, made 3 accusations against Jesus that would have been relevant to Pilate. In other words, it would have caused him to, wait a minute, that has something to do with me. They said, remember, he was misleading their nation. Second thing was, forbidding to pay taxes. And the third was that he was claiming to be a king. Now, as I mentioned before, the first complaint, that's vague. What do you mean he's misleading the nation? Give me some details. Well, they couldn't. The second one was absolutely untrue. Yeah, I mean, we remember in Matthew 22, 17 through 21, that Jesus was asked about paying taxes. And he was handed a denarius, a coin, and he pointed to one side and he asked the question, whose image is on this coin? And it was Caesar. And remember his response? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's what he said. The second or third one, Jesus was a king. I mean, Matthew 2:2, 21:5, 27:11, but not in a political sense. Okay, not in a political sense. Excuse me. It's interesting that Christ made no effort to defend himself against the fabricated charges, which, as you read, surprised the governor. In both Matthew and in Mark, it says, so Pilate was amazed. He was amazed that he didn't try to defend himself. Don't we have the right to defend ourselves? Yeah, that's a given right. But Jesus didn't. Why do you think that? He didn't need to. That's exactly right. Good answer. He didn't need to. Pilate then retired to his chambers in the praetorium, and he had Jesus brought to him. And when he got there, Pilate asked Jesus what? And this is found in all four of the Gospels. Are you the king of the Jews? And it's interesting that Matthew, Mark, and Luke says that Jesus responded with basically, yes, it is as you say. But notice what John's account includes. This is in verse 34. I read it here. John 18:34. Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself on this, or did others tell you this about me? Why do you think Jesus asked that question of Pilate? Any idea? Well, one of the things that Roper mentioned, and I agree with this, he was probably asking the governor to consider the source of the accusation. You know, is this are you asking this question because you want to know? Or did somebody tell you? Did somebody tell you to ask or find out? If anyone should have known whether or not Jesus was a threat to the Roman peace, it would have certainly been the governor, right? You would think. You would think. On the other hand, if the charges had originated with the Jewish leaders, then the governor may have thought the allegations had to be kind of sketchy, suspect. What's the real reason behind it? Because let's face it, the Sanhedrin was hardly noted for its concern for the welfare of the Roman government. They didn't really care, did they? Yeah, just about themselves. Just about themselves. So Pilate answered, he had heard it from the Jews, and he urged Jesus to explain what he had done to provoke them. Look at verse 35. Pilate answered, after Jesus asked that question, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? You know, when somebody is brought before a judge, you know, it's automatically assumed that they have done something. You know, that you're proven, what is it? Yeah, you're proven, you got to prove your innocence, which is so wrong. So wrong. But that's what he assumed. What? Yeah. What have you done? Um, Jesus answered him. He answered him, but not in the way Pilate would have understood. Look at verse 36. Jesus answered him and said, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. And that's such a true statement when you think about it. If his kingdom had been on earth, all of his followers would have fought to death to protect the king. That's just, take a look at what's happening in the war right now with uh, Russia and, Ukraine. Zelensky, the president there, has all these people there in the city protecting him because many attempts have been made to kill him and try to end this thing. So they would have fought tooth and nail, so to speak, to protect Jesus. But he didn't understand that. He did not understand. Pilate, he was confused, right? He was baffled. So Jesus asked him again. Look at verse 37 in John 18. It says, Pilate therefore said to him, some translations say, so. Mine just says, are you a king then? Just come right out and ask you. Then Jesus answered, said, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Jesus had explained to Pilate in a negative way that his kingdom was not of this world, right? Verse 36. Next, in a positive fashion, he, Jesus, declared what his kingdom was. And what did Jesus say that his kingdom was about? The truth. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, remember what Jesus said in John 14 and 6. Let's turn back there real quick. It's just a couple. When he answered Thomas, Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Through me. Jesus concluded his statement to Pilate by saying, everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Now, this is the case because those who listen to Jesus are individuals who love the truth and are willing to obey the truth. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Yeah. We'll learn this as we get into the final stage of the trials, but Pilate did not want to condemn Jesus. You know, 3 times we'll see here in the next lesson that he said, I find no fault with him. I find no fault. But he gave in to pressure, gave in to their wants. Yeah, the loud voices. Um, yeah, the need to keep his job. Think about that even today, how applicable that is, that we sometimes, you know, compromise our positions of integrity or whatever it is. I'm not saying anybody in here, but I mean, just in life in general, to keep our jobs. Okay? Any other thoughts or comments? Yes, Galen. I think she did. I mean, I do. Um, I mean, he thought, and we're getting ahead of ourselves in the next lesson, but thought about, he offered up, Jesus, or, do you want me to give you a Barabbas? Yeah. I mean, Barabbas was an evil guy. I mean, down to the nail biting evil. But yeah, I think he didn't want to. I think deep in his heart he knew that Jesus had done nothing wrong. Yeah. Hmm. I hadn't read that, but hey, okay, I'll look that up because I have that book at home. Yeah. Any other comments? Yes, John. Yeah. 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 This would have caused a stir. I mean, uh, yeah, and he wanted to keep his job, cushy job, I guess. I don't know. And yes, Patricia. Right. Yeah. It had to be fulfilled. You're right. I mean, and so, but it's interesting to discuss the reasoning behind some of the actions of these people. Why did they answer the way they did, or why did they act the way they did? Um, it all worked together as God's plan was. Other thoughts or comments? Yeah, he was in a no-win position because whatever he did, he was going to alienate somebody. Yeah, yeah, and he took, as we often do, the easy way out, the path of least resistance. And anyway, good comments. Good comments. Um, we talked about it already. Pilate concluded his interrogation of Jesus with an abrupt dismissal. He says, "What is the truth, or what is truth?" Um, was Pilate joking, or was he serious, or just being cynical? Maybe. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, you know, yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, given the gravity of the occasion, I mean, this is serious, right? It's unlikely that Pilate was joking. It may be more reasonable to conclude that he was being cynical, because had he been serious about asking the question, he would have stayed around for the answer. But what did he do? He walked out. He didn't even stay for the answer. Yeah, I think we can read into that for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's sit down and have a conversation. Yeah, no, that's true. In his chambers, he wouldn't have had other people hearing the questions he was asking. Yeah, yeah. So, um, but it's clear, I think, that Pilate did not really understand who Jesus was, but he did understand, and this gives credit to him to a certain degree, I guess, that Jesus had done nothing worthy of death. And so that's why he said, he came out and pronounced the verdict. I find no guilt or fault, depending on what translation, in him. And in his mind, that was the end of it, right? Not so fast. If Pilate thought that his ruling would silence Jesus' enemies, he has misjudged them. No doubt their voices became louder and more shrill as they pressed the charge of insurrection. Look at uh, Luke 23 and 5. It says, but they kept on insisting, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee even as far as this place. Now, when we get into the next lesson, stage 3, it goes back to the Roman trials, but he was sent before Herod. Okay, now, I think this is a good place to end right now because I don't want to start something and then have a few days to go by. So we're going to end a little bit early, but uh, see, all these cries, all these complaints, all these things that presented Pilate a dilemma. What was he going to do? In his heart, he said, I find no guilt with this man. But he's falling to the pressure of the outside influences that were against him. And so, anyway, any final questions before we? Yes, Galen. Oh, yeah. Yeah, most definitely. In my opinion, Pilate didn't have a backbone. I mean, he had no leadership capabilities, and he just went with the flow. Yeah. Okay, good place to end. Thank you so much.